Hello and welcome to my YouTube channel. My name is Sandy Allnock. I'm an artist, and today I have part 2 in a pair of videos on creating white puffy clouds in your art. And I have an extra treat in this one. I'm going to be breaking in 2 brushes and a sketchbook to do a wash and ink piece. And this one, if you want to just fast forward to the art, just zip to 5 minutes. Otherwise, we'll be talking about the new art supplies that I just got in my order from Jackson's. And then at the end, I will turn them into cards that I'm going to send during the holiday season. All right, let's get started. I'm a brand new affiliate with Jackson's Art, so if you are someone who is over in Europe or anywhere that you can get Jackson's Art stuff, you can now use my links. Yay for that. And I wanted to try some of their papers. So this is their cold press sketchbook, and it has texture on both sides. I'll have to let you know eventually whether you can paint on both sides or not. But the weight is nice. You know, feels like the same weight as Arches. It feels a little bit like the paper that I got in my Sennelier sketchbook. There's not as much tooth to it, but there is this kind of very regular texture. And both the pad and the block that I got are the rough, and the sketchbook is the cold press, so I can try out both. And this is drawing paper, and I'm really curious to try it. It's very heavy. And I'll be doing a drawing in the near future. If you have any suggestions on what that should be, let me know in a comment. But I want to see how this goes. Sometimes these drawing papers are great, and sometimes you're thinking, what pencil were they using? So we'll see. But this is the block. A block is basically a pad of paper that has glue all the way around the outside edges. So you could take it out with you and not have to tape anything down. I also got 2 brushes. One is a Jackson's Art Synthetic Kolinsky. I'm always curious what companies think is, going to make a good synthetic, because I think of them as very soft and very fluffy brushes. They just have a certain feel to them, and I wanted to see what theirs felt like. So I got a number 12, and this is an Issa Bay. I've heard about these brushes for a long time. Some painters I know swear by them, and I needed a new number 4. My Da Vinci has just disappeared. I don't know where it is, but it's been gone for a couple weeks. So I thought I'd taunt it and get a new number 4 and see what happens. This one is a fully natural Kolinsky. So it is animal hair. I know some of you don't like that, but you can get the brushes you want. I'll get the ones I like. So when you are getting a new brush, you want to break off that gum arabic in water and do it very slowly. Just kind of tap the brush until it starts to release, and then you'll be able to wash it completely out. And the reason not to break it when it's dry is because you could break some of those bristles, and you don't want to do that to your brand new brush. So the one from Jackson's had a lot of it in there, and it was a little tougher to get it going. The Issa Bay was just fine. As soon as I put it in the water, the gum arabic just melted right out of it. Now I had to wait and dry them, and I couldn't paint right away because I was trying to do this to it so you could see what the brush is like. This one's still a little bit damp, but you can see it's got a snap to it. Like, it comes right back. It's on the stiff side, much stiffer than what I'm used to for Kolinskys. So that was a little warning to me. And when I got it wet and then just did one quick shake with it, this was the only point that it gave me. Usually that's when you get your best point, when you just snap your wrist and shake water out of it. This one does not have a very good point to it. Some synthetics do, some don't. Really depends. And then this is the natural Kolinsky from Issa Bay. And it's, very fuzzy, very soft, the softness I'm used to. And when you snap this one, it comes to quite the point. It does have a few stray little hairs sticking out. We'll see if that ends up being a long-term problem or not. Sometimes that's just, happens when you shake it, and then once you start painting with it, you don't even notice any of that. But we'll see what kind of detail I can get with a brush like this. But I absolutely love the gold. The gold band and the gold, the detail on it is just, it feels very, very nice. And it's not a expensive enough brush to feel that fancy. So that was a good thing. So I am using Verditer Blue for my sky color. And Verditer has a lot of texture to it. I thought that would help me to see what this texture looks like in the paper. And it feels, again, just like the Sennelier paper that I have used before. I have a sketchbook that a friend got me in France. And it's not bad paper. It just feels a little bit different. This brush, though, felt almost like I couldn't feel the paper under the brush. There's like, I don't know how to explain it any better than that. It felt like I was touching part of the brush to the surface, but I wasn't touching the whole brush to the surface. So I switched over to my Isabe. I just wanted to get a little bit of detail around the edges of the clouds. And I'm not trying to make these like little perfect poofy clouds in the way that you might think of making round scallop shapes, because that's often not what clouds will end up looking like. And I'm going to be using some pen and ink with it anyway, so I just wanted some roughish edges. Went back to the big brush, and I'm slowly adding water to the mixture of paint so I can go from darker at the top to lighter at the bottom, because it's often what you'll get with skies. When you look straight up, it's a darker color than at the horizon because you're seeing some atmosphere. My cloud shapes are going to get smaller and more horizontal as I get to the bottom. But I was not getting very many small shapes with this brush. It was not cooperating. I don't know. I feel bad. I wanted the brush to be good. But I've switched over to the Isabe, and part of it is that it's a number 4, but part of it I could feel the paper under it. I don't know. It's a weird thing to try to explain how that feels. But I wanted some gray color, so I mixed up some French Ultramarine blue with a bit of transparent red oxide to make a gray color. And I do that so I can get some variation in my grays, and I can make it a little bit browner, a little bit bluer in different places if I want to, or I can just make it a gray rather than keeping a black in my palette. And I'm just painting the bottoms of the clouds so that they meet up with the blue. I don't want any white necessarily, or at least little tiny bits of white, if anything, at the bottoms, because the light from the sun is hitting the tops of the clouds. I, of course, did not mix enough. I never mix enough of anything, so I had to mix more. But I'm trying to get this done while the blue is still wet, because I want to be able to go back in and work at them more. And if you end up, painting something like this, if you're going to try this one and you're like, oh my gosh, it's all drying, then just take a little spritz of water and just re-moisten everything just slightly. Don't puddle it, but you can kind of get the paint to stay movable. And here I decided I was going to put some darker in the top part of the sky. And so I'm using a thicker mixture of the Verditer, but it's not going all that well, shall we say. I'm fortunate that this was planned to be a wash and ink piece with some pen and ink so that I can do that. But like even the release of color from this brush didn't make me very happy. So I think I'm not going to be recommending this brush. I'm sorry, Jacksons. I was hopeful. So at the bottom, I was debating whether I'd make this into winter trees or make it into mountains, but I would basically use the same technique anyway, just a bunch of scrubby lines down there, and I'll define it with the pen when I get to that point. But then I mixed up some really thin gray so that I could start adding in some lighter shadows now that the mid-tone gray there has started to dry up a little bit. And then I'm using just a wet brush to just kind of melt out a few edges. You could do that with a brush. You could do that with a baby wipe and just lift off some. And the longer you wait to do it, the harder it will be to lift stuff off. So, working quickly on a really loose wash like this is really my favorite way to work, because I have those options to make some really quick light changes since the paint is still wet. So I started in with my TWSBI Eco Pen. This is the medium nib. It's rather on the hefty side compared to some other nibs that you might use, but I like to have some of my lines being nice and heavy and then sometimes other lines being lighter. So I'll use both the medium nib as well as the fine nib, not the extra fine on this project. But I'm using my hand like to hold the pen back instead of like cramping down on it because I wanted something very light. So even my hand is not resting on the table or on the paper. I'm just kind of hovering over top of it so that I don't end up like drawing really carefully. I wanted something that just felt very loose and fresh. I'm not making my lines really consistent. I'm lifting up the pen, so I'm just making short marks and, letting some places not have a line at all. Depends on your style, but that's just what I was going for here. I wanted something that felt just very loose and fresh and that kind of thing. Your style is yours, mine is mine, and sometimes it's just a little bit more fun for me to do something that's not as reliant on being very, very tight and careful. As I get down to the smaller clouds, I was trying to make the decision whether or not I wanted to continue using the heavy pen or if I wanted to switch to the lighter one. Decided I would let all of the lines remain nice and heavy on the outside. And then the interior shading lines and doodle lines, I would end up making those using the lighter pen. But you can see on some of these clouds, I'm incorporating some of the blue into the cloud itself if I didn't get any of the gray paint in there, drawing in some extra little tiny cloudlets off in the distance, that kind of thing. So, I'm not tied to what's on the paper. I'm not tied to that watercolor necessarily. I'm just kind of having fun with it. For the shading, I'm using the fine nib, and I'm just using vertical lines throughout the whole drawing. For me, when I'm trying to create something that has a unified feel to it, especially if everything else is kind of loose and crazy and the watercolor is all over the place and fun, it helps to just have something be consistent across the entire drawing and having a consistent direction to the line work can be something that will pull it all together, even if you've got lots of disparate parts going crazy. And so here I'm using all vertical. Sometimes I'll do that with horizontal lines, or I'll do that with angled lines. Depends on what I feel like at the time. The places where I'm putting the lines are in the shadow areas of the cloud, obviously, and they're in those gray sections. So some of the gray areas where there's deep shadow thrown over the cloud from the sky, because it's at the very bottom, it's underneath, like this whole section that I drew in here is underneath of clouds and it's not getting any sunlight. But in some areas, I'm letting the watercolor be the lighter shadow portions, and I'm only putting the pen in the darkest parts. Because when you're drawing something that's white, if you put a ton of pen in it, if I used the pen to do all of this, the gray watercolor in pen and ink, it would get really heavy with a lot of ink. And since I wanted this to be something that would feel light, like clouds, kind of has to have a lot more air in it. Now, there's going to be some clouds that might be a little bit on the darker side. Like this one, I thought I'd put one cloud that has its shadow side sticking in. And if you've seen the other video, you'll know what I mean. Sometimes there's just a really big cloud right overhead, and all you see is the shadow portions of a cloud. My goal here was just to make all the clouds feel different. I didn't want any of them to feel like they were replicas of others, because clouds are, I think, as unique as snowflakes. For the scene down below, I decided on mountains eventually. I would use, like I said, the same process for painting, like little, scrubby bits if I were making trees out of it. But here I'm just making specific kinds of carves into the mountains with certain kinds of shadows. Whereas if it were just trees, I would be doing branches, that kind of thing. So you could do that kind of a thing as well. But the watercolor underneath is not really doing much. It's just kind of something to be there so that I'm not working on blank paper. Sometimes the blank paper is the scariest part of doing any artwork. Is like, okay, it's blank. What do I do with it? If there's already a little bit of color there, it works just great. I'm all about taking any of the fear out of doing your drawing work. Now, you can use pencil to draw yourself some guidelines, absolutely, especially if you're going to try to make these specific mountains that you know. But I find that the watercolor just does a great job of allowing me the freedom to change it up with the pen as I go. And I was very excited with how these were coming out because I could kind of envision them as cards, because I am due to get a whole bunch of cards out in the mail to patrons in October. I don't send cards out to absolutely everyone because that is hundreds and hundreds of cards, but I try to send out as many as I can. And especially as we get through the fall season into Thanksgiving, where I get to just express my gratitude to my patrons who are so awesome. And then a lot of holiday cards as well. I send out probably every year about probably 400 or 500 cards, and I get back, maybe a dozen a year. So it is just my way to send out a little bit of love to both patrons and customers and that sort of thing, as well, of course, as friends and family. So my sketch is done, and it's going to be ready to turn into some cards that are just going to have a nice loose feel to them, like a piece of artwork, not like a piece of AI, like in my recent video that I talked about. Now, if you like the wash and ink technique, but you want something maybe a little bit simpler that you can work from photographs, the new class, I guess it's about 2 weeks old now, is the Winter Wash and Ink class. And we work from photos. So you're going to trace the photo in pencil and then do the watercolor and then do pen and ink on top of it. And for the snow, we're using masking fluid. So there's a lot more control in this than there was in the drawing that you saw today. So I did a whole lot of off-the-cuff stuff in today's video, but in the class, you'll get to actually look at a photo reference and trace it and all that sort of thing. So much easier for many people who are not as loose and crazy as me, but you're going to get that loose feel because we're only going to put our pen and ink on strategic parts of it and allow the watercolor to do the rest, which makes your Christmas cards go faster, by the way. So I was glad to get a bunch of cards done while I was making that class as well. Now, I keep a little frame around that's card sized so I can kind of put it around something and see, do I want to sacrifice that sketch from my sketchbook and turn it into cards? And this one was going to make two quite nicely onto white cardstock with a black layer. I added some stickles to it just so it would have a little bit of like snowy sparkle to it, because the sentiment that I found in my set of stamps that I wanted to use for this is going to go on the inside, and it says, "Thank you so much," because it's going to be a thank you card. There's a little sparkle you can see there. Not really great for photographing the sparkle, but there is the sketch for today, and I hope you'll try it. It's really a loose and easy one, and it's a lot of fun to do, and you might actually get a card made too, if that is your goal for the week. If you missed part 1, where we talked about clouds in photographs and assessed them, looked at how they are structured and how they are in perspective in the sky, then please do go to the link in the doobly-doo. You can catch up on that one. There's also a playlist there, so you can also see more about creating paths and roads. And I will be doing more of these in the future and adding to that playlist. Also, a little heads up, on the 28th, I am going to be doing a YouTube Live at 8 a.m. Pacific time, which is 11 a.m. Eastern time. Figure out the math for you from there. I just want to do some artwork with you to celebrate potentially getting to 150,000 subscribers. I don't know if we're going to be there by then, but that's my goal. So let's hope that it happens by the 28th. I will see you then. And yeah. In the meantime, get out there, make some art, create something every day, and I'll see you soon. Links in the doobly-doo to the class and everything else. Bye-bye.